listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box, where you get the inside scoop on the steps action takers and decision makers take to align their purpose to their principles and achieve their goals in business and life. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hey there, everybody. This is Sarah, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the No Labels, No Limits podcast, a podcast all about shedding our limiting labels and beliefs so we can live our dreams and shine our lights in the world. This week, we are joined by Julie Wald. Okay, little bias on my part. I love the topics that Julie talks about, partly because it's something that I've been examining more and more over the past, I would say 5 or 6 years, but really ever since COVID, and I've had extra time. It's like I keep pulling on threads. And so when Julie came up as a potential guest, super excited. And she and I have just had a short little chat. I know you're going to love her. So let me give you a little background on her before we actually dive into the interview. Julie is a wellness practitioner, and she's been one for over 25 years. She is the founder, CEO, and chief wellness officer at Golden, a global leader in wellness education and employee self-care programs. Julie is the author of the Amazon #1 best-selling book, Inner Wealth: How Wellness Heals, Nurtures, and Optimizes Ultra-Successful People. And Women We Admire named her one of the top 100 women leaders in healthcare of 2021. That's quite a resume, and it's not even all of her resume. But with that, it's a good place to welcome our guest, Julie Wald. Hi, Julie.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Well, I'm excited to have you. I always have questions around the topics that you can cover. But before I dive into that, I like to ask all of our guests whether or not there's something that you personally do regularly. It might be daily, it might be other than that, but really keeps you focused on your big dreams, your mission, for staying true to your whole self.
That is such a great question. I would say that, there are so many things that I do on a daily basis that are essential to me staying true to my whole self, both on a personal level and on a professional level. I start my days with a gratitude moment. It's first thought, best thought, I call it. And I literally have trained myself that the minute my eyes open in the morning, the first thing I do is think of what I might be grateful for. And it changes, and it can be deep and profound, and it can be as simple as, a hot cup of tea that's coming in 5 minutes or anything in between. But I would say that gratitude practice really keeps me anchored in my heart. And I think that my heart is my superpower. So that's why that practice is so essential.
That's so funny you say that. When I was in 5th grade, we all got assigned this health assignment, like the class got broken up. So I got assigned the circulatory system. Don't you know, I knew all kinds of things in 5th grade, which I've since forgotten. But when you say your heart is like your superpower, I'm thinking in so many ways, literal, figurative, spiritually. So how powerful is that? Well, thank you. And when I was reviewing your background and kind of your career, I'm really curious because you have a background as a clinical social worker, right? So you really have that whole personal system piece, right? Where did that start to grow or shift and your focus onto the personal well-being aspect of what you do today?
Such a great question. So I worked in the field, in the social work field for about a decade before I started my company Golden in 2003. And I was working with some of the most disenfranchised populations in the United States. I was really doing some deeply fulfilling and just really important work. providing clinical services to people who were struggling with a wide range of mental health and socioeconomic challenges. And it was stressful. It was extremely stressful. And so I learned that I really needed to take care of myself. And so I was early on in my career. I was a young woman. I dove into learning every possible thing that I could about wellness and self-care, quite frankly, just in order to tune the instrument of my own self so that I could show up at work, able and willing to help without really breaking myself down in the meantime. And then that became the launch pad to some opportunities that came my way to work with some extraordinarily high performing executives in New York City just post 9/11. And so what ended up happening was I had a side hustle. I would work my social work job during the day, and in the early mornings and the evenings, I would bring practices like mindfulness and yoga and really an integrative approach to self-care to primarily people in the financial industry, as well as some entrepreneurs who were really suffering just post 9/11. And there was sort of an opening that happened. And once I started finding myself doing this, this very wellness focused work on a professional level, I realized that it was the integration of all of this that was going to be so just so fulfilling for me professionally. And so that is really where Golden was born. Actually, one of my most amazing clients who's still, still somebody that I'm in close touch with today said to me, this work, I was working with him 3 mornings a week at 5:30 a.m. And he said to me, this work has been so transformational. We were doing a lot of meditation, a lot of yoga, a lot of breath work. It's been so transformational for me. I want all of my employees, which was a lot of employees, to also have access to this kind of support, because I can only imagine that it will make my organization stronger, not to mention the fact that it seems like the right thing to do for my team. And that was the moment where kind of Golden was actually born. And I came home at that time and I said to my husband, I said, there's a really interesting opportunity. And the rest is kind of history.
So here you are, you're a social worker, right? You are in the field doing a practice. And I don't want to oversimplify it, because social work is not simple, because you've got all the systems you're connecting with. But you basically are doing a focused practice. And now you're being asked to take this concept you've created and developed from a single person, which is pretty manageable, right? It's like social work. I can customize my plan for that person, to an organization. So how did you, or did you already, maybe you already had this, how did you design that approach? And did you support yourself with the business around you that allowed you to do that without creating chaos?
Yeah, great. It was really a couple of things. I think first and foremost, I spent some time thinking a lot about, at this point, I had a number of years of experience as a clinician, as a social worker, and I had, enough experience in working with this more corporate clientele, this high performance clientele, that I could see a lot of parallels between, some of the universal challenges across socioeconomic lines that people were struggling with. The interesting part at that point was that, the many of these sort of, struggling, more disenfranchised people, as opposed to, sort of ultra high net worth people that I was working with, I found very early on that they were kind of equally happy and equally as miserable. and they were actually worrying about many of the same things. Obviously, the people with resources were more resourced, so they could get more help. They could, they could get more support with some of their challenges. And obviously it takes the edge off quite a bit. But at the end of the day, people were worrying about money. People were dealing with stress. People were dealing with addiction. People were dealing with worrying about their children or their aging parents. And there was all these sort of universal problems, so to speak. And then I started to look really closely at what were the things that were actually moving the needle across the board for people. And that's where the 4 pillars of wellness were born. And those 4 pillars that we came up with, sort of the ingredients, so to speak, for cultivating well-being, were consistent movement, consistent stillness, consistent connection, and consistent nourishment. And so that became sort of the framework for our corporate wellness programs, because we thought, okay, how do we go into organizations and, educate people about some of these truths that we found in just being kind of, in the trenches and working really deeply individually with people, and start to draw, some of the lines so that people could understand, okay, so these are the ingredients: movement, stillness, connection, and nourishment. Obviously there's others, but those are sort of the core, most basic ingredients. And how am I doing in those areas? Am I moving consistently? And am I finding enough rest and recovery time? How am I nourishing myself, not just with food, but with nature and with, art or music or play or whatever fills us up? And am I connected? And that's probably the biggest one. Do I have relationships that are meaningful and fulfilling and healthy? And so once we kind of came up with these more simple ways to sort of understand things, we could build programming in the realm of education, in the realm of giving people opportunity to practice certain things, and then individually evolve and coach them through their own obstacles. So that's really the framework that we used, from the beginning and still today, is education, practice, and evolution. And if you think about anything, if you think about, learning how to bake or learning how to play a sport, first somebody needs to teach you how. Then you need to practice. And then you need to figure out, where am I having struggles? Where are my obstacles? And how do I solve for those problems? How do I overcome that? And so teaching self-care, and we teach self-care based on science, we teach it based on all the latest research, is really no different.
Okay. You shared a bunch there.
I know. I'm sorry if I
No, I love it. I'm trying to focus my own brain, because there's like 3 different trains of thought I have going on. One is about the similarities in people. I love your pillars and wanting to dive into that, but then also seeing where people get hung up, right? And put barriers that don't need to be there. So I'm going to make a note for myself, because I want to come back to this. So
and let's just make a note also to talk about, because I loved what you said at the beginning in your intro, to this podcast about limitations or limiting beliefs. And I just want to put a pin in the idea that that's one of the biggest obstacles for people.
Well, I know it is and has been in my life, right? Like, even it's a constant growth cycle, right? What you go, okay, those don't bug me anymore, right? And then 4 or 5 years ago, I think, oh man, those are big mountains. And then I look at them going, that's nothing, right? But there's always a new one, right? Because your subconscious just brings you up old stories, the different old stories. So I love asking myself, when did I say that was true, right? Like, I don't have time. I get it, right? My day totally upends itself sometimes because other family members need things like for health and stuff. What do you say? Put your health on hold because I don't have time for you? Sometimes I do, but not that callously. But sometimes it has to be put on hold. But there are those micro things you can do, or that I can do, that tell me I am focused on my own well-being. Even if it's not as much as I would like it to be today, I haven't abandoned that. And so that's just my own inner dialogue with that. So let's go and talk about the pillars. But before we do that, I want to ask you a question for a definition, actually. And, you talk about inner wealth. Can you define that for us? Because I'm having a feeling, for me, that's probably the umbrella that all of this kind of is connected through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Part of that title for inner wealth came from what I was speaking to around some of those similarities in some of the ultra high net worth and some of the more disenfranchised people that I was working with, and realizing what at the end of the day helped people to cultivate a sense of happiness, of well-being. So what I learned was, sometimes some of the people, who had achieved the most, who had accumulated great wealth, weren't necessarily like feeling very abundant or happy. And oftentimes it was the people, or sometimes I should say, it was the people who had almost nothing, who had technically on paper, not necessarily achieved, such a magnificent resume, or, had very little in the bank, but somehow they had this sense of sort of inner wealth and inner abundance. And, obviously, I wanted to sort of take some of the inner wealth and give it to these people, and then just take some of the outer wealth and give it to these people, and then everyone would be happy. But I couldn't do that. So I decided to figure out how to, support some of the people that I was working with at the time, which were these ultra high performers, in figuring out how to cultivate the inner resource, the internal sense of abundance, so that, whether it's like a gratitude practice, like what I mentioned when I wake up, or a sense of authentic connections with people that they care about, or a sense of self-care, like the ability to nurture themselves, that at the end of the day was what creates a sense of inner wealth, of inner abundance. And ultimately, I think that, that's what we all crave and want, is that inner fulfillment. And it seemed so interesting as to, how at the time, again, very young in my career, how people could have such success on so many levels, yet somehow seem almost poverty-stricken in other ways.
Well, when you talk about the inner wealth, there's also giving our sense of well-being to external factors that we never, ever had control over. Like, do people like us? How are we doing? Yada, yada, yada. It's like, who knows? We don't know. But like you're saying, you start with your gratitude practice among one. It's like, wait a minute, I'm already starting off ahead of the game.
Absolutely.
But it's tough when you're having a tough go. That takes some discipline to remind yourself, I'm not going down the fear trail at this moment, right? I'm coming back. So when you, let's talk about some of the limiting beliefs that people will come to you with, or when you start working with a group or an organization. What are the typical limiting beliefs? You touched on them a little bit. What are they? And then what are some of the ways you suggest people rethink that, they're put on a different set of glasses when they look at what's possible for themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's limiting beliefs, and it's also kind of story, right? Like, we tell ourselves a lot of story, like, I'm so overwhelmed, or I don't have enough time, which, it's not to take away from the fact that there's a lot on any given person's plate at the moment. But when that's our inner mantra, when that's kind of the belief and the way that we're actually kind of orienting to our day or our workload, it's a very disempowering perspective. And I think, one of the things you mentioned is understanding kind of where inside that's coming from. Is that coming from a certain feeling that we need to identify, or is it coming from a certain time in our life, or kind of a belief system that we developed around what our capacity is, or ability to set limits, or to say no, or to have boundaries around what we can do or what we can't do. And I think that's one of the biggest, particularly because we see so much burnout in the workforce, which is just so prevalent right now. So helping people to identify the fact that when they're orienting to their day and to their job and to their life from that perspective, it's extraordinarily limiting, and it's very much of a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. And so if they can start to reframe their relationship to how much they have to do and how to prioritize what they have to do, and what that internal voice is. So maybe it's instead of I'm so overwhelmed, or I don't have enough time to do all the things, it's something along the lines of, I'm going to prioritize what's most important. And so, a simple reframe like that, all of a sudden, if you have 15 things on your to-do list and you decide what are the top 3 most important things, and you get through them, then the day was actually a success. Whereas if you're orienting towards, I have 15 things on my list and I'm never going to get it all done. No, you're not going to get it all done. So what's most important? And can you kind of focus on that? And then obviously when you reframe it, then there's sort of a sense of self-efficacy when you actually do get something done, and you can kind of back into that way of seeing things from a behavioral perspective.
And Julie, don't you find that when the list is long, it creates an artificial sense of urgency that everything is important to happen, right? And so even so, then we're focused on getting the list done, not necessarily on getting an effective resolution to one of the things that we prioritized.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One other thing that I'll mention, and this is sort of, I see this a lot in some of the deeper work that I do with executives, and is a deeper limiting belief around I'm not enough. And that creates this kind of never-ending need to either achieve or, produce more income, or whatever it might be, which becomes really a recipe for a lot of pain long-term.
Well, and if you're in a role of a leader, you're not going to want to say, this is my inner worry that I'm not enough, right? I mean, oh my God, that has significance. So if I'm not enough, what am I doing leading this organization? I don't even get to be human. I'm struggling, blah, 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 but I can't share it because I might not be enough. I mean, those are scary little inner stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. Those are the stories. And then out of those stories are born kind of hypervigilance, where people are working around the clock and burning themselves out because it's never enough. And then obviously from that hypervigilance, comes burnout and just exhaustion, and ultimately like physical illness or issues in relationships or other things. So the ripple effect actually starts to become kind of about a lot more than just even work or leadership. It ripples out into many different areas of life in a way that can be challenging.
Absolutely. Well, everything feels heavy then.
Mm-hmm.
So like, oh, my day's already, I'm not even out of the bedroom yet, and my day's like heavy. So then the thought of like, okay, how am I going to handle this thing that just popped up? I mean, it's just, you're already carrying this heavy burden instead of going, I've already prioritized. I'm sure I will handle everything I need to, but at least setting yourself up, right?
Absolutely.
Just like saying, hey, I'm enough. I'm here. I woke up. We're going to do this. I had a counselor tell me that many years ago. Like, I was going through this super, super stressful thing, and I am running this organization, small organization. I should have gotten a little more due diligence before I said I would lead it. But anyway, it was stressful. And I said, and then had family emergencies come up, and I said, I can't even go to work. And he says, just show up. You don't have to do anything. Show up, be in your office, be visible. Everybody else will calm down. They will know it's good. They'll go do their stuff. They know what to do. All you have to do is sit there. I'm going, that's just not going to be enough. He goes, bet you it will. And so the next time I saw him a couple of weeks later, he goes, how's it going? I said, well, amazingly. And I went through the stuff that we'd accomplished. She goes, showing up's half the game, Sarah. Just show up, right? But that shifted my framework, like from feeling like maybe I'm not enough at a time where I probably wasn't enough, Julie, for what other team members wanted, to just going, okay, I can do this. I can show up at least for 2 weeks, and we'll see what happens. So if we go and think about some of those kind of barriers that you were talking about, what might be some simple ways to begin to integrate? I mean, I know it's complex with each person you deal with. You might say, well, I would start you here, and this might be an easy thing. But if there were 2 or 3 touch points that you would say, if this, then you might want to start here. Are there a couple examples of that you could share with us?
Sure. I mean, I think most importantly, the first step is self-awareness, right? Is awareness of what's actually happening. We're so stuck in our story that if we don't even recognize that it's a story, then it's hard to even begin to start pulling out tools to help us kind of recenter in the moment and connect with a different storyline. But so I would say sort of practices that help people build awareness around what their stories are or what their limiting beliefs are. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can look like a relationship with a coach or a psychotherapist. It can look like a meditation practice, or all different kinds of sort of introspective types of practices. And without first developing that ability to witness, it's hard to then kind of take steps to have tools. So with that being said, with the first example around someone who feels like they have, not enough time or too much to do, once we have the awareness of that and that's happening, then it's really about, and this is where the inner wealth comes from. It's really about those, like, calling on those inner resources, those inner tools, like, oh, okay, so what can I do to feel more, more adequate, more capable of meeting the demands in front of me? Well, I can prioritize, like we talked about. I can, instead of having a 15-item list, I can have a 2-item list, and I can determine what are the 2 most important things that I need to get done today, or even the 1 most important thing that I need to get done today. And then if we achieve that, we feel good. It's the key, though, with all of it is in the practice, is in the consistency of, how do I create a ritual so that I know this is my tendency because I've developed enough self-awareness. How do I then create, a ritual to ground myself on a daily basis and orient to my day consciously in the way that I want to. And, again, I have a ritual, for example, because I struggle with these examples that I'm giving, they're close to home and they're relevant in all my clients, because again, just like what I mentioned about the ultra high net worth people and the disenfranchised people and everybody's stuff is the same. I mean, the people who are the helpers have the problems, and the people who need the help have the problems, and everybody's managing similar themes. I
love that you said that, because that is so true. There is no one exempt.
Exactly. And as we especially say about people in my work, in my line of work, like, we teach best what we're learning ourselves, right? I'm a work in progress. And I work really hard at it. And then hopefully, I'm able to work with clients and organizations in that same way. But, so for example, for myself, when I sit down in the mornings at my desk and I know that I can easily go into kind of overwhelm mode, I have a practice where I take 3 really deep breaths, and then I have a little handwritten notebook next to my thing. And I say, okay, what are the most important things, like the 1, 2, or 3 most important things that I need to achieve today? So these are my own practices that I teach my clients. And when it comes to not enough, it's a big one. And that is really, usually we have to do some deeper work around, what are the experiences, whether it's, childhood experiences or, relationship-based experiences or professional experiences that have helped us to develop that story and develop that belief. Where is that coming from? What are the moments in our lives where where we've decided to orient in that way? And Again, it's the self-awareness of, okay, this is my story and this isn't serving me. So how do I understand where this is coming from and why it's here? And then with that awareness, what does that, because usually these things start from a certain chapter in our life or a certain experience in our lives where our nervous system starts to get wired in such a way where it doesn't even feel like it's a story because it feels so deeply embedded in the fabric of who we are. It's like running through our veins. It is our nervous system. And so when we can start to look at the moments throughout our journey where that story may have been born or reinforced, then, we need to actually go back to those moments and talk to that person that started to have those beliefs, right? So if I developed a belief in, elementary school that I wasn't smart enough, or that, for whatever reason, something came up, whether it was an interaction with a teacher or with a parent or with a peer, and suddenly I started to develop this way of understanding myself and how I, how I relate to the world. I have personally found, and do this with many of my clients, if I can go back to some of those experiences and look at it from kind of a present day, more rational, non-storied, perspective, kind of again about bearing witness and having the self-awareness to say, okay, kind of, if I could put that story on the back burner, like, what does that little girl who's in 5th grade actually need to hear in order to feel like she's enough, or that she's smart enough, or whatever enough? And then, it's about, again, the repetition of revisiting that little girl again and again and again, and reminding her, that she's enough.
Okay. So I agree with everything you said in terms of practice and being able to do that. And I know people can not want to go retrospective, but to understand and have compassion for ourselves and how we chose, because at some point when we're aware, then we have to acknowledge we're choosing to stay in that story, right? We can either deal with it or we can just choose to stay in it. And in my world, once I'm aware of it, if I choose and it's not positive for me personally or my family, and I go, oh, it's too uncomfortable to deal with it, then I'm choosing to be there and be a victim of a story that is no longer, or maybe never was true, So, but I'm real curious because so that self-awareness and that connection to self and that self-nourishment that you've talked about in the pillars, talk about the movement piece of the pillars, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's so many layers of the pillars. They can be very literal, and then they can be kind of not so literal and more metaphorical. But movement is really fundamental to our health and well-being on so many different levels. And so, when we can move our bodies consistently, we're able to not only obviously stay healthy and strong physically, which is very empowering mentally when we actually feel strong and resilient on a physical level, but we're also moving, energy through our bodies. We're moving, blockages through our bodies because we are sort of a whole being, and the mind and the body are interconnected. And so if I'm thinking these thoughts, they're probably also living somewhere in my body. So if I'm able to move for the purposes of health and well-being and strength, that's empowering. And it also helps me to kind of continuously flush through some of the blockages. Now, a lot of the work that I do is also, because I'm a mind-body practitioner, is helping people understand where some of these beliefs or feelings are living in their body. So then they can be even more deliberate through practices like yoga or breath work to actually very consciously, move energy in the areas that you feel stuck. A lot of people feel stuck here or in their chest or in their stomachs. And once you know that, there are certainly, so many beautiful practices to get things moving.
I was going to ask you about that because of thinking when we come to notice like we're holding things, there is that connection, right? All of a sudden the light bulb goes off and you take a breath. You're going, okay, wait, how long has that tension been there? Right?
Exactly.
And that awareness, then the next time you're feeling your shoulders tense, you're going, okay, last time it was, what is in my brain right now? Or my system, my nervous system. So how do you work with people on that? Are you doing that one-on-one or in groups, or your team is doing that? Because I think that
all of the above, of the above. So we, my organization does a combination of group work, where we're really teaching people tools, through even things as simple as desk yoga, and mindfulness of sort of how to work, even as you're sitting at your desk, to kind of keep things moving. If you feel your stress and tension and belief systems all lodged up in your neck and shoulders, how can we help you, number one, gain awareness, and number two, create the movement that's needed to kind of keep things moving. So it can be done in that kind of group fashion in a way that, quite frankly, is very digestible in a corporate setting. So it doesn't feel too kind of way out there, in a way that might be difficult for some people. And then on an individual basis, we really try to understand what are the most ideal practices, that this person can work with in order to move things through their bodies. So sometimes I'll do, with some of my clients one-on-one, we'll do guided visualizations where we'll work with some of the beliefs, we'll work with some of the limitations, we'll sort of come to understand where they are in the body, where they're living, what that feels like, what are the experiences associated with them. Oftentimes we can use the body to actually access even more information. And then with that understanding, I will guide through a wide range of primarily, yoga-based movements to create energetic flow. But, on a personal level, I've been a yoga teacher for, I don't know, a very long time, 30 years or something. And and it comes very naturally and I love it. But I also find that I need to use my muscles, and I need to work out, and I need to sweat, and I need to do things that aren't always so yoga based, because that's very balancing to me. I tend to, sort of, it's not my favorite thing to do if I were to sort of have my druthers, but I know that when I do, for example, like weight training and, kind of more intense, training types of work, I feel incredibly empowered and strong. And it feels actually like an essential ingredient for me in my ability to kind of access my whole self.
Okay, so you said two things and I started to go down another thought process, but I'm coming back. So when we think about working with individuals and then organizations, corporations or organizations, and you've done that work with people, what are some of the organization level benefits? Like if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, you know what, maybe I should have Julie and her team come in, but what benefits am I going to see for my staff, my organization, our shareholders, or our donors, depending on the type of organization?
Yeah. So there's so many benefits that it's hard to even know actually where to begin with that. But, first and foremost, it's especially in the world that we live in, it's the human thing to do. It's the right thing to do to support your team. If you're a leader and you have a team, good leaders support their team. And when people are struggling, which most people are on some level within an organization, it's in order to if you can resource them with ways to navigate their challenges, the outcomes of that are tremendous. For example, you are going to obviously, drive performance and optimization in your team. They are going to be better at what they do. One of the biggest reasons, especially recently, organizations come to us is for recruitment and retention. People want to work with organizations that care and organizations that are creating opportunities for them to grow and evolve both personally and professionally. And so many companies are hiring us to really create a culture where the DNA is so caring that people want to be part of it. People don't want to leave. It becomes almost part of their lifestyle. Obviously, when you can help people with science-based self-care and really learning how to practice lifestyle medicine, we call it, you drive down healthcare costs and, minimize things like sick days, and it's beneficial in that whole realm of sort of healthcare costs, because you're making people healthier and happier. So they show up at work and they get sick less. So those are just sort of a few that come off the top of my head. But actually one more that I'd like to mention, especially because of the way that we deliver wellness, there's a lot of different ways to deliver wellness in a company. But one of the things that we find to be probably the most powerful aspect of what we do is that we give colleagues, employees, teams an opportunity to connect. And if you noticed, which I know you did, that connection is one of our primary pillars. And so everything that we do is delivered live in a context where employees can come together and have what we call sort of a together experience, a together action. And we know that shared experiences are what build relationship. The reason we feel so close, to someone from high school who we haven't seen in 30 years is because we went to the prom together and we had all these shared experiences, and it makes us feel really connected. And the same thing goes in an organization. When we can create opportunities for shared experiences, those relationships deepen. And oftentimes those are the reasons why employees don't want to leave, why they want to stay and continue on.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And in one case, this small organization that I work with has had people from a large organization come and say, "When's your next opening?" I want, the pay's not as good. The work is totally different, but the culture is like people don't want to leave.
Right.
They really don't unless they have to, right? Family or whatever. But I'm going, that says something when you've created that culture that people are connected around a mission and a vision, but they are seen and appreciated for who they are and what they bring. And their health is part of it.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah. So, Julie, I can imagine people are going to want to reach out to you, or your team, but where do you want people to go so they can learn more about what you offer, how you do it, and how they as individuals or organizations can benefit?
Sure. So you can check out our website, which is www.heyitsgolden.com. I invite you to follow me on LinkedIn. I invite you to email me directly if you want to connect. My email address is Julie, Julie, at heyitsgolden.com.
Okay, so those are some easy ways to get a hold of them and reach out to Julie. You can tell already from just her conversation, not only her wisdom, how much experience she has, but her heart for the work and everybody she's helping. And Julie, with that, I do want to thank you for taking time to be on the podcast. You've given me many things to think about, and I appreciate that. And I really appreciate your work in the world, because I know it is helping bust down those limiting beliefs about how we can all have inner wealth and abundance.
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much. This was a total joy and a pleasure to speak with you. I truly enjoyed every moment.
Fabulous. We'll be back in touch. And for the rest of you listening, we'll see you next week on another podcast. Remember, if you got value from even one thing that Julie said, please like this episode, click the share button, send it to a friend or a colleague, but help everybody get the inner wealth resources that are possible through the work that Julie and her team is doing, and others who share similar passions for making ourselves and our work environments healthier, more enjoyable, and more impactful. So thanks, and I'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic vision coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. So please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Until next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.